Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV, and welcome to this Herpanwo TV book review of Why Call Them Back from Heaven by Clifford D. Simak. Now, I haven't done a book review now for over a year. The last one I did on Herpanwo TV was The Art of Racing in the Rain, the one about the doggy. Oh, it was great, that. Yeah. I've done some book reviews on Herpanwo Voice, by the way, since then, if you're interested. But it's the first one on Herpanwo TV for a while. Now, this is also, it's not just a book review, it's also a follow-up to a previous video I did called Cryonics. If you've not watched that video, I do advise you to go and watch it so you get a bit of background into what's happening now. And so I'm not going to repeat myself, I'm not going to repeat all the points I made in that particular video. So if you've not seen it, go and watch that. Now, this is a book, it's a science fiction story. It's a novel. It's actually quite short. I'd say it's only 40,000 to 50,000 words. Published in 1967. So it was published actually in the same year as there was a massive media campaign, or a massive viral media story about the Bedford cryopreservation. The first man to be cryopreserved. It's actually, as I explained in the background video, Cryonics. And no doubt that news story inspired this author. Now, it's a short book. You can actually read it in about 3-4 hours. You can kind of, like, I suppose, it's quite likely that he heard of that news story, because it was early in the year. I think it was January '67 this happened. So he probably wrote the book and got it published within a year as a result of this news story, because it is about cryonics. Now, he may well have written Ettinger's. He may well have the author Simak may well have. He may well have read Ettinger's book as well, The Prospect of Immortality, which came out in 1962, I believe, which really laid out the idea of cryonics and popularised it, and led to the very first attempts in the 60s to cryogenically preserve people by various means. Through the mid-60s, there were several attempts, and several very disreputable incidents occurred where people were wrongly cryopreserved and had to be basically buried. I've covered that in the cryonics video in the background. But this tells a story. It's actually set in the future, in the mid-22nd century, so 2148. So quite a number, more than a century in the future to now, certainly, and more than 2 centuries after the book, almost 2 centuries after the book was written. Now, it tells a story of a world in which everybody is cryopreserved. Everybody. It's set on Earth in the future. All people are cryopreserved, and there's something called the Forever Center, which organises it all. And they have billions of people stored in their building. It's described as a big tall tower more than a mile high, so that's much taller than the Burj Al Khalifa, for example, which I think is about 2,500 feet. It's more than twice the height of that. And it contains billions, I think there's 96 billion odd people in cryogenic suspension. They are frozen in liquid nitrogen, and they're waiting for the time when science has the technology to revive them. And it turns out this is a world in which that technology is almost available, and the Forever Center is promising it's promising that they're going to start reviving people very soon. They have the technology to bring these dead bodies back to life. It's that, so everyone's waiting for what they call Revival Day. At the same time, all living people are desperate to get into cryopreservation. Absolutely desperate. Everything they do is geared towards their own cryopreservation, because everyone 100% believes that cryogenics is possible, that people can be frozen and then revived. Everyone is 100% convinced it's true, and so forth. Just about everybody, with very few exceptions. There's these people called the holies, who are like they're the kind of remnant of religious people. They're sort of a kind of vestigial church, which only a handful of eccentrics go to. Religion has almost died out. It's been replaced by this science of cryonics. Now, I think there's possibly somebody has linked the idea of immortality to religion, which there is a connection. Usually it's atheists actually who argue this. The whole purpose of religion and why it evolved in the first place was simply that. It's because of our awareness of death. And it's a way of alleviating that. It's a comfort blanket. As I explained in my Skeptic video, I'm not going to put a link into the description box for that. Now, this is very interesting because at the beginning of the story, the very, very first scene of the story is about someone called Franklin Chaplin. Now, his job is to recover dead bodies. Now, what happens is every single person has an implant inside their chest connected to their heart. And whenever their heart stops beating, in other words, they're dead, a radio signal is emitted to a nearby transmitter to be picked up by the recovery team. Now, there's these recovery teams at recovery centres all over the world, and they're connected to the Forever Centre, and their purpose is to go and recover the body and take it to the Forever Centre where it undergoes cryonic preservation. The body undergoes cryonic preservation, and wherever you are in the world, there's always one of these recovery teams nearby. They've got helicopters and things, and they come and get you because of this thing in your chest. But most, there's some areas that are not covered. For example, wildernesses like Siberia or something, and no one ever goes there because everyone's too scared. Because everyone wants to go into cryonic preservation. Everyone is terrified. The thing that everyone fears is death without cryonic preservation. Everyone's terrified of this, and so nobody. This fear of death without cryonic preservation, is the actual linchpin for the entire political system that the world is under, and the economic system too. The Forever Centre is extraordinarily wealthy. It's actually managed to gain most of the world's capital because people invest everything they have in it. They invest all their earnings in in cryopreservation. No insurance company will cover it anymore, so they have to basically save up whatever it costs. And as a result, everybody's living in terrible poverty, including Daniel Frost. Daniel Frost, the main character, he's the head of publicity for the Forever Centre. He lives in a one-bedroom flat, even though he's like his senior official at the Forever Centre, because he's paying the money for his cryopreservation. He's saving up for that. Now, this guy Franklin Chaplin, it begins where a court hands out the most terrible sentence imaginable to this guy called Franklin Chaplin. Franklin Chaplin was part of the recovery squad, and through negligence, because he was actually an engineer and he didn't maintain the helicopter properly or something like that, I can't quite remember. I read the book last month. I haven't got the book with me, incidentally. Now, just as an aside, I don't have the book with me. I actually gave it away to Age Concern. I just handed it in. I'm not going to read it again. It's not really a collector's item because it's got a missing page, and that's important because there's a missing page which is very important. Funnily, it's one of the most important pages in the book that's gone missing. I know because I went and got it from Kindle, so I could read the missing page. And also, as it was only a couple of quid, so I bought it from Kindle, and so I could research this video as well. But yeah, Franklin Chaplin has the sentence of the court is not death. He's not going to be executed. He's going to lose the right to be cryopreserved. Apart from that, he's completely normal. He's untouched. There's no other punishment. He can live the rest of his life normally, but when he dies properly, and he can't come back as a frozen corpse like everyone else is. And so the whole world is stunned by this, and Chaplin himself is very stoic about it. He actually goes to a church and he speaks to one of the holies, just because it's his only option now. For the first time in his life, he goes to talk to the holies. But yeah, he committed an act of gross negligence. He didn't maintain the helicopter properly because his job was to be a technician, and as a result, a cryopreservation, a body could not be recovered. The body's basically, I think, was eaten by wolves or something before they could get to this person in a remote area. Although, as I say, no one goes anywhere too remote. And as a result, because of his negligence, he lost the right. Essentially, somebody lost the right to, or lost their place in the cryopreserved future. He then has to give up his place in that cryopreserved future. It's like tit for tat. Even though he didn't do it deliberately, but still, it's a weird thing. It's like everyone's sort of lost interest in life in this particular scenario. Everyone's completely lost interest. They're all just sitting there. They're spending all their money on cryopreservation. They're not enjoying themselves. The Forever Centre is enormously rich. Everyone else is poor. because they're just saying all I have to do is get into cryopreservation and then I can live forever. That's kind of what the cryonics is. It's rather like I suppose the cryonicists of today's world are like that. The only difference being, I suppose the only difference being that they're fewer in number. Today's cryonicists, I said, there's only a few thousand of them in the world. Oh, I found out by the way, there were two organisations in the United States and one in Russia. There's Cryorus, there's one in Russia, and then it's Alcor and and the CI Cryonics Institute in the United States. There is a third one. I remember saying, what's the third one? Do you remember me saying in the last video? I found out it's actually the Cryonics Institute of Oregon. That is the third cryonics institution. So there are 3 in the United States, 1 in Russia. Only a few thousand people across the world are into this sort of thing. Interestingly, I'm going off on a tangent now, but I remember I first heard about cryonics. It wasn't from watching Woody Allen's Sleeper, although I thought it was very funny. I did enjoy that film. That's another fictional account of someone recovered from cryonics. It's a comedy. It's a very, very witty comedy, Woody Allen. But I first heard about cryonics. There was a news story of this French bloke who wanted to be cryonically frozen. And he wanted to amend the law so that he could actually do it before he dies naturally. So in the first video I explain how there's all kinds of legal loopholes you have to go through to be cryonically preserved. You have to be allowed to die naturally. You can't like pull the plug on yourself. This guy in France wanted the right to commit suicide. He was actually very sick. He had like a tumour of some kind. He was going to die anyway. He wanted the right to pull the plug on himself, basically, commit suicide so that he could enter cryonic suspension. And if you can do that, it's much better because, if having to die naturally makes it all the more difficult because they've got to get you to the Cryonics Institute. I described the process in the last video. If you can actually turn up and then just die and they put you straight in, it's much better. There's much less ice damage and things like that. So he didn't actually win that right. In the end, he just died and he was cryopreserved normally. But I just remember I thought it was a very odd thing. I remember that very well. Oregon Cryonics is the third company in the United States. Now, it's interesting talking about this obsession. You see, this is an interesting idea. It's very obvious that in this particular scenario, the fear of death, or specifically the fear of death without cryopreservation, is ruining people's lives. People don't enjoy their lives anymore. They're essentially just kind of in the waiting room for eternity. So they don't do anything risky. Everyone's given up playing dangerous sports. People don't smoke. Well, it's funny because some people do things that could speed along their death, as long as their death doesn't involve something that wouldn't lead to cryopreservation. So anything that might damage their body, like driving dangerously. If you drive dangerously and you have a car crash, it could damage your body or your brain specifically beyond repair, so that you couldn't be cryopreserved. So everyone drives very carefully. Things like that. Dangerous people are giving up dangerous sports. No one goes into anywhere where any situation like they don't visit really remote areas where there's no recovery service. Things like that. And I wonder if it could be that fear of death does fear of death, thanatos as it's called, how does it actually affect our lives? It affects some people more than others. And despite what the skeptics say, and the MBAers and people like that, there's not necessarily a connection between belief in the afterlife or belief in a religion. There are people who don't believe in any afterlife, who are either agnostic about it or positively disbelieve in it, who do not suffer from fear of death, who do enjoy their lives. Bertrand Russell very famously said this. He said, I brought this up in my skeptic video. He said, I believe when I die I'm just going to rot. I'm not young and I love life. And he was very cheerful about it. He did actually die, and like everyone does, he was pretty old when he died. And he did rot. But there's other people who believe in some kind of afterlife. Some of them believe in some kind of religion. They're terrified of dying, either because they fear judgment by God or karma or something like that, or for some other reason. So enjoyment of life can be ruined by fear of death. There's this guy Gallup, what's his name, this weird kind of psychology guy, who's made the claim that Thanatos is basically the whole basis of, he says it's the price we pay for consciousness. I covered that in my Marcus du Sautoy video. I can't keep putting these links everywhere, but Marcus du Sautoy, I gave him an MBA silver. But it's this. He said basically the price of becoming a conscious being. Now, he believes that humans are the only conscious beings in the world. I don't actually believe that. I think consciousness does seem to be present in much of the animal kingdom. But he says that the price you pay for that is an awareness of your own demise. Very MBA-ish, I think. But Marcus du Sautoy went along with that too. So basically the whole economic system of this world is turned on its head compared to today. There's literally no capital, no disposable income anywhere. It's all spent on the Forever Centre. The Forever Centre is enormously rich. And Daniel Frost then gets into trouble, and this is where the interesting bit begins. Everything's focused on. Also, I've got my notes are not quite in the right order, but but I'll come on to that in a minute. But basically, they compare it to ancient Egypt because the Egyptians, it's said, did things like mummification and built pyramids because they were desperate to preserve the body for the afterlife. In a sense, they fought back against Thanatos that way. Although I believe the pyramid has another purpose, but we'll come on to that. Doesn't matter right now. There's this. This is a quote. Anyway, I'll read you the quote. We live in poverty. It's about talking about people living in poverty, living just functional lives with no disposable income, nothing at all. They just do nothing except sit there, eat and work and sleep and wait for the day when they can enter cryopreservation, and they don't have to worry anymore because they're frozen until they can be revived, and when they can be revived, they don't have to die. They can live forever. But they say it's not because we like it, this wretched way of life. We've imposed it on ourselves. A down payment on a second life, the fee perhaps for immortality. And that's the thing. That's the interesting thing, isn't it? There's another group of people, actually, they're called loafers. Now, the holies, there's several people kind of outside the system. They're like they're rather like the un-V-worded people today, how we're becoming. But the holies are the religious people who won't get involved in cryonics because they believe in heaven. In fact, the phrase, "Why call them back from heaven," is like their slogan, and they scrawl it everywhere as graffiti. And then there's the loafers. Now, the loafers are sort of like, they're nihilistic dropouts who just don't care about anything. They go out and they sort of wander around in caravans and cars. It's a bit like in Mad Max style, because the countryside has become completely uninhabited in this world. You know, everything's overgrown. The farmland has gone because all food is created artificially. So all the farmland's overgrown. All the roads are broken, or they're covered in grass and things like that. But they live in what's left of the countryside. They live what's left of the human habitation in the countryside, or the loafers. But then it comes that you see, Frost attends this meeting where they say that one of the scientists. I'm going to give away a few spoilers here. All right, can't help that. I won't tell you everything that happens, but it's important to know this. It's not like a major thing anyway, because it's a short, very sort of like superficial kind of book in a way, and that's the downside of it, really. It really ought to be longer. But anyway, a scientist at the Forever Centre called Mona Campbell has gone missing, and no one knows where she's gone. But she was working on a paper about mathematics, and then suddenly she takes the paper and she vanishes. But they think the paper's around somewhere, but they don't know where it is, and they're all desperate to search for this paper. And Daniel Frost gets into trouble because he doesn't quite get there, but he's on the verge of exposing something. Now, you see, I suppose it's inevitable this question will come up in this society, because seeing as the Forever Centre is so fabulously rich and everyone else is so fabulously poor, a few people have started to wonder, you've got all these bodies frozen, and you say that you're going to revive them very soon. You know how to. Do you really? Is it possible that this thing is just one big confidence trick? It's one monumental fraud. Now, people have actually pointed at the modern cryonics movement. They've said that, which is slightly unfair because these companies like CI, Alcor, etc., they're not profits. So they're not-for-profit companies. However, the Forever Centre is very much a for-profit company. It's made an absolute fortune. It's basically taken over the entire capital of the world. It's the only institution in the world with any economic power and any sort of financial investment, any sort of financial positive investment. Everyone else is just indebted to this company because they're just counting down the days to when they get frozen. And so this paper is connected. The Alcor president, not Alcor, sorry, the Forever Centre president and all the other people are desperate for this paper to be found and for Mona Campbell to be arrested. And there's this horrible guy who's the head of security, who is like looking for her. Now, and there's all kinds of other things. There's this kind of weird, there's this urban myth going round that the Forever Centre is some massive scam, because what they say is that there's this bacteria that eats people's brains even at very low temperatures. It can survive like the temperature, excuse me, cryopreservation centres minus 196 or whatever it is, liquid nitrogen, and they say, oh, it eats everyone's brains. So all those frozen bodies lying in liquid nitrogen, they've actually got no brain. The brain is gone. And that the Forever Centre is not telling anyone, so they can't revive these people because their brain's gone. If their brain's gone, that's it, because the brain's the important bit. It's the neuro, which has all the memories and all the consciousness and everything else in it, apparently. But the Forever Centre aren't telling anyone about the brain-eating bacteria because everyone's given them money for the prospect of this immortality. And what happens is when Daniel Frost gets involved in finding this paper, he doesn't even know exactly why it is. He gets kidnapped and arrested and put on trial, and he is punished with ostracization. It's really, really weird, actually. He's given the exact opposite punishment to Franklin Chaplin. Franklin Chaplin is just allowed, he's given no punishment at all. He's allowed to carry on with his life normally, except he's lost the right to be cryopreserved. Frost is the opposite. He loses everything except the right to be cryopreserved. He has these marks put on his body, big red circles on his cheeks and his forehead. You can see it on the front cover. And then he's just simply, and then he is basically kicked out, and no one's allowed to talk to him. No one's allowed to give him food or money or shelter or anything like that. And excuse me, and he has to live the rest of his life like that, which probably won't be very long. He's completely banished from the society. He's sent to Coventry, no one speaks to him, no one has anything to do with him. That's the rule. But he is allowed to be cryopreserved. So the conspirators, the people behind this conspiracy that Frost is trying to uncover, with the help of Anne Harrison, this lawyer, what they're hoping is that Frost will simply commit suicide at some point, get frozen, and that'll be the end of it. It's really, really strange. They say it's treason to humanity he's committed. Treason to humanity. But you see, this is the important bit. This is the major spoiler, and I'm going to give it to you. But the thing is, what Mona Campbell has discovered is that there is a natural afterlife. So, near-death experiences, spirituality, the afterlife is all real. And the Forever Centre don't want anyone to know that. They want to suppress it because they're living in a world where everyone is a materialistic atheist. An atheo, skeptico, materialo, everything elseist. And they've given, apart from the holies, everyone's given up religion and spirituality. They're complete and utter materialistic monists. So they don't want anyone to know that there's an afterlife, and it's It's weird. Does that remind you of another video I made? Yes, my review of the film The Discovery. Now, it's obviously a completely different scenario. The film The Discovery is very good. I'm actually going to put a link in the description box to that, because not the film that I reviewed it. It's a Netflix movie about a scientist who discovers proof of the afterlife and how that affects all of society. This is similar. Excuse me. This is something similar. This is about a scientist who discovers proof of the afterlife, and the company, the Forever Centre, want to suppress that fact for similar reasons. Except it's more blunt with them. It's more simple. It's about money. It's about the fact that the monopoly of power and finance that they have in the world will be broken. Because if people believe there's a natural afterlife, a lot of them will simply cash in their shares and say, well, I don't need to be cryopreserved then. Because most people who get cryopreservation today, and indeed in the 60s when this book was written, are simply materialistic atheists. It's a kind of secular quest for immortality. It's a bunch of atheo-skeptical materialists who've essentially cashed in their MBA. And that's what, if you want to know what MBA, do I have to explain MBA? Watch my skeptic video. Anyway, they're basically, they are desperate to track down Mona Campbell and get rid of her, eliminate her. They're desperate to track down this missing paper which Frost is supposed to have, because this missing paper has all the details of her discovery. And the big denouement, the big reveal, is on the missing page in the paperback. So maybe I shouldn't. I gave it to Age Concern. I mean, maybe I should have just thrown it away. It's a first edition, but I can't sell it as an antique because it's in such bad condition. Oh. Anyway, it's the end. It's an open-ended story actually, but at the end. Oh well, I won't tell you exactly what happens at the end, but it does sort of end happily. But it's not anticlimactic. What is it? It's an uncertain ending. It's very ambiguous what actually happens at the end, because there's these other weird characters. Like there's one of the characters like a holy, and he lives on an island on his own, and he keeps making wooden crucifixes and trying to fix them in the sand on the beach, and they keep falling over, which is very symbolic, of course. There's another guy who's a loafer, who's trying to make money by finding old jade statues and things like that. It's weird. It's interesting comparing this, because there's another book I've read about this where there's a kind of secular, not necessarily afterlife, but longevity treatment. It's like in the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson that I've mentioned before. Somebody discovers, they don't discover a way to cryopreserve you and bring you back or anything like that, but they do discover a way to eliminate the aging process, so people essentially can live forever. It turns out they can't live forever in the end, but everyone at the time, people think they can live forever. And again, there's this massive, there's a huge amount of political upheaval as a result of most people wanting to get this treatment. Others don't want it. There's people who just want to live a normal lifespan. But they fight a war over it. I remember, so it's interesting comparing that it's interesting comparing Why Call Them Back from Heaven to the Mars trilogy. And also, like I said, comparing it, the best comparison is to The Discovery, this really amazing film with Robert Redford that I reviewed on her Panwo TV. Oh, my eyes are itching, excuse me. I've read several reviews of this since I read the book, and I must say a lot of them make good points. For example, they say it's a bit bland. The book is a bit bland. It's true. I mean, the problem is it's very short. You could read it in a couple of hours, like I say, 40,000 words, something like that. It's very short. It's probably even shorter than that, actually. I could show it's like really thin like that. It's slightly too long to be called a novella, but only just. And its scope is limited as a result. Its character development is limited as a result. It's a brief idea-driven story, but at the same time it's weirdly disconnected. It's very rambly at the same time. So technically I'd say it's not a very well written book. It's not terribly, it's a bit It is slightly colourless. One reviewer described it as colourless, short but somehow rambly, bland. I suppose it is a little bit. And I said the ending is a bit odd. You have like this big, it sort of rambles on a bit, and you just hear, it covers a lot of Frost's adventures. I think about a third of the book is simply Frost's adventures after he's been ostracised. He's got these marks on his face. He leaves the city. He goes looking for Mona Cowell. He goes for the abandoned villages and towns of the countryside. Has a fight with the loafers and things like that. It only really then picks up the story sort of like, so the story is kind of, that feels a little bit like time out of the main plot. But then it just jerks back into the plot for the ending, and including the missing page. Which it's ironic that Frost is looking for a single piece of paper and the book is missing one page, which has the important bit on it. But it does raise that question of the political nature of the afterlife, and whether we can maybe compare it with the UFO cover-up. We know that the government are covering up aliens. They're covering up the fact that we're not alone in the universe. Excuse me. The fact that there is extraterrestrial life, that it's found us, intelligent extraterrestrial life. It's found us here on Earth. It's here with us now. The government have decisive physical evidence, proof of its existence, and they're keeping it from us. Why? Political and economic reasons. They're scared of how it's going to affect society. They're scared of how it'll undo the economic world order in terms of energy production, for example, and things like that. And in a sense, if it ever became unassailable, if that's the word, irrefutable, incontrovertible, that we live forever naturally anyway, in the sense that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, etc., etc., whichever way you want to do it. And you don't need some religion. You don't need see some man in a weird dress to help you. You don't need to confess your sins. You don't need to give money to the church. You don't need to bow and pray and things like that. It happens to you anyway. A number of people will not like that. Churches won't like it. But how many other people? In my Helen Duncan video, again, I'm not posting a bloody link, I asked the question, this Helen Duncan, you see, when she was in court, she wanted to perform a séance in court. Just watch the video if you don't know what I'm talking about. She wanted to watch a video, she wanted to do a séance in court, and the judge forbade her from doing it, even though you'd say it was necessary, because she was accused of being a fake medium. If she can perform mediumship in court, then that kind of proves her point. But the judge wouldn't let her do it. Why? It may have something to do with the particular case involved, as they wanted to get her in jail because they were scared that she was going to give away wartime secrets. This was in 1944, and they were preparing for D-Day. But it may have had a long-term strategic purpose, which is the government just don't want us to know who we really are. And David Icke has touched on this particular subject, but he doesn't go into it in detail. Maybe I should. Maybe we should all ask the question: is this one of the secrets they're keeping from us? In the same way that the Forever Centre was in the book. Maybe there's a parallel with real life there, whether Clifford Simak intended that or not. Anyway, that's all I can really say about this particular book. It's not bad, it's enjoyable, it's passable, it's a short read, doesn't take long to read it, and it's a quick in and out really of this particular scenario, this particular idea. I give it 5 out of 10. Worth reading. Get it on Kindle though, so there's no missing pages. Don't buy it in Age Concerned Cowley Centre, Oxford, because that copy is the one I gave to them, and it has a missing page. I should have told them, shouldn't I? Maybe I'll go back. I'll go back to the shop and I'll tell them. Alright, there's going to be another video very soon actually. I'll probably do a live stream within the next couple of days if you're watching this. There may even be a notice up when you watch this. It's going to be about, well, you can probably guess what it's about. Just look what's going on in the world at the moment. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.